James Baker, an Arlington resident and a former commander of the Vermont State Police, has played a leading role in the formation of the Arlington Area Renewal Project, a community improvement group that began meeting a few years ago to bring some fresh thinking and new initiatives to the town and surrounding area. He's had a long and distinguished career in law enforcement in Vermont, extending back over 3 decades. He retired from the state police in 2009 at the rank of colonel. He served as the police chief in Rutland and also as the interim police chief in Manchester after that, and also served as the interim director of the Vermont Police Academy. More recently, he worked with the International Association of Chiefs of Police as the director of law enforcement operation and support. We had a chance to talk with Colonel Baker recently about his latest assignment as the commissioner of the Vermont Department of Corrections, which has been tackling not only the coronavirus pandemic, but also an earlier situation which prompted the resignation of his predecessor. Later in this discussion, he also gives us an update on where things are at with the Arlington Renewal Project. Colonel Baker, first of all, thank you for making the time to be with us today. Last December, you were named to the post of interim corrections commissioner for the Department of Corrections, and at that time, allegations had surfaced about some misconduct, particularly at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility up near in the Burlington area, which was the state's, I believe it's the state's only women's prison.
That's correct.
Some concerns about what was going on there, and you were appointed early in January, if I recall correctly, for a 4-month post to sort of oversee straightening that situation out. And then, of course, as we all know, not long after that, along came COVID-19 and more concerns about how that would impact inmates and staff members who worked in correctional facilities. So I guess just to get us started, maybe we'll begin with how things are going on the original project that you were summoned out of retirement to take care of. What can you tell us about how things are going in terms of straightening out that situation that you were assigned back in January with the women's prison?
Yeah, when I was asked by Secretary Mike Smith from Human Services to step in as the interim commissioner, he wasn't really looking for me to straighten anything out as much as really asked me to do a few things. First of all, he was looking for me to come in, get the department settled down. There was a lot of churn and a lot of concern and a lot of energy, and folks were not in a great place inside the agency. So focus on the morale, get my arms around that. At the time, he wanted me to focus on the legislative session because of my prior work at the legislature and my relationship with certain key legislators that have oversight over the Department of Corrections. The third piece that he was looking for me to do was get a look under the hood. I don't come from a corrections background. I come from a criminal justice background. He wanted me to take a look under the hood. I don't understand programming. I understand a little bit better now, 4 months into this. What I do understand is systems, how systems should be set up, how systems should operate, and how systems are supported by people and leaders. And that was the original charge that he asked me for. And I was supposed to stay until April 30th and then give back to him feedback on what he asked me to look at in the form of some type of document that would lay that out. As far as the allegations at the female facility in South Burlington, there's an independent separate investigation being done by a law firm headed up by Tris Coffin, who used to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of Vermont. And that was moving along until COVID-19 hit. And it's kind of difficult right now because of we have shut down our facilities to any outside folks going in. That includes those investigators that would be interviewing folks inside the facility, and we've shut that down. So it's in a bit of a holding pattern right now.
So your assignment there will be extended past April 30th.
Well, it's not in my personality to walk out in the middle of a crisis. So I have told the secretary that I'm going to stay in place until he determines that he can make a safe transition to a new commissioner.
All right. Well, we'll follow that along as well. So I guess the main thing that's probably been occupying your time and attention over the past couple of months has been the coronavirus pandemic problem and how it could potentially impact prisons. Of course, folks packed into a building, boy, talk about a petri dish. That sounds like it. How has that been going? Have there, I know there have been a couple of instances where some prisons seem to be quote unquote hotspots for some of the virus. What can you tell us about where that stands at the moment?
Well, look, as I sit here right now, we have no one inside our system that exhibits any symptoms of the COVID-19 virus. We have no inmates that are currently being tested, and our practice is to test based upon the presenting of symptoms. We do have positive tests within the system, and we set up a surge location to manage that at the St. Johnsbury facility in St. Johnsbury, where we have been able to isolate a number of inmates that were tested positive at the St. Albans facility. We also had 18 employees that have tested positive. Most of those employees are in the recovery stage and are now being tested to be able to clear to come back to work. We did have one employee who was fairly serious, who was hospitalized, and I'm happy to report is doing much better now. In fact, when first contracted and diagnosed, was very, very sick and was in very great danger. And through some great medical care, that individual is starting to come back, and we're happy to hear that.
Well, it's very good news.
We started very early. You know, what I found out about being the Commissioner of Corrections, unlike any other job I've had before, there's a lot of inbound that comes from a lot of different places. And there's a lot of folks that have a special interest, advocacy groups and ACLU and other folks that have a very big interest in, you know, what's often talked about across the country, which is mass incarceration. And the ironic part is the Commissioner of Corrections has very little control over who ends up in jail. We don't put people in jail. We manage the system. Now, in some cases, because we're a dual system, not only do we run the jails, but we also supervise 7,000 people in the community through probation and parole. But we've made a very concentrated effort since the end of February. We've reduced our prison population by almost 300. And, you know, we've gone down significantly in order to better manage the population internally when it comes to social distancing and to be able to cut down on the risk of the virus getting inside our facilities. So we've done a lot of work around that over the last several months. And I said this at a press conference yesterday, and I say this proudly. The staff inside corrections has done more than anybody else in the system to reduce the prison population. And, you know, some people can argue with that, but it really is about thinning out the population so we can better manage. And if we hadn't done that when we got hit with the virus in St. Albans, we would not have had the flexibility in the system to isolate people the way we did to prevent further spread of the virus.
Now, the 300 people that have been they're no longer in a prison facility in the state, were those people who are going to be released anyway, or were they sort of transferred out of the prison and into like a house arrest situation?
No, most of them. What we did was we sped up our process a little bit with the guidance that we wanted to be careful and not take a lot of risks with individuals. So it's the normal course of business of how we review cases when people hit their minimum sentence, because we're obligated to review their cases. Now, with that said, also the reason why the population is down, there's less folks coming into the system. The courts have slowed down. arrests have slowed down from police departments. Less folks are coming into the system. That's why we've been able to keep that population down. But you know, we have sped up our review process, and again, balancing public safety with the need to prevent the virus from getting into our facilities.
So, because I guess the fact that there are fewer people coming into the system is a result of the lockdown, and people aren't traveling around as much, or able to get out as much, or driving
Yeah.
as much, or
I'm going to make that assumption. I haven't had the time to really research that, but I'm going to make that assumption. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to hear that. It sounds like that situation that is under control, because I know there's a lot of concern about that a few weeks ago, certainly, and probably I'm sure still
Right.
is, but
Right.
it did seem to be a potentially difficult situation. Just to pivot real quickly here, while we have a few more minutes, what you were doing before you got summoned back out of retirement was working as with the Arlington Area Renewal Project, spearheading that effort to, you know, as our mutual friend Don Keelan would say, bring the shine back to Arlington.
Mhm.
I guess with the lockdown or shutdown or social distancing in place, meetings haven't been able to happen uh, same frequency as you were doing them up until last year or the end of last year. But you have a number of initiatives that kind of got going last year, and I just wondered if you could update us on some of those. I mean, one of the big ones was getting the position of town administrator for Arlington in place, and the select board has signed off on that. And I gather that administrator will be arriving hopefully sometime later this year or this summer. Is that still the plan?
Yeah, I've really had to scale back. I still spend a little bit of time every week on the renewal project. Um, to Don's credit, Don Keelan has taken over quite a bit of that for me, kind of following up on phone calls. And so, the town administrator, that committee that I originally chaired, I had to step away from. I think are close to making recommendations to the board about who the town administrator will be. It moved from a part-time position to a full-time position, which we had advocated for early on in the report that we did to the town and to the select board. The other big projects that are still ongoing, we transitioned the farmer market from under the umbrella of the renewal project, because it was never meant to be, the renewal project is never meant to be here forever. The idea is that a lot of the work that we're doing would be starting to be transitioned over to other formats and folks running it. And the farmers market is now formed a nonprofit and is going to be operating under that nonprofit. I do know from Jessica Roberts, who's heading that up and doing an incredible job with the vendors, and I believe is planning still a farmers market following the guidelines that have been put out by the Vermont Department of Agriculture when it comes to how to run a farmers market. So I suspect that will kick off. I haven't talked to Jessica a little bit about that, but I think it's a June, July kickoff and run through the summer. And as you know, that was a huge hit the last 2 years. I mean, brought a lot of folks out and mingled together, and I mean, really, really a great event. The other piece that continues is the grant that a nonprofit received, headed up by B.B. Bullock, and looking at a cultural center, including a performing arts venture at the former St. Margaret Mary's Church on Route 7A. And there's been a lot of conversation going back and forth about that. And also several conversations around potential interested parties that would be interested in helping out financially secure that property. So nothing to really report about that right now, other than that conversation is still going on. It's very difficult in this environment to get that kind of work done. And the last big piece is the housing effort that we had started on that really got put on hold. But I have a phone call tomorrow, Saturday, to kind of see where we are with that and see if we can breathe some life back into that project. That was the $300,000 grant we secured. And then the final piece is Hooper Pickering, who was involved in the Recreation Committee, continues to work on funding for the piece of property in West Arlington that would become town forest and would be used for recreational property. And there's progress being made on that. And again, it's very difficult in this environment to go out looking at fundraising right now, because we just have to look around us and see what's happening from the economy. You know, and the last thing I will add to that, Andrew, is that myself, Don, and others have had some conversations with the town officials about the necessity for every town in Vermont, in our case, the Arlington, Sunderland, Sandgate area, to really be thinking about what recovery is going to look like after this. You know, our businesses in town are being impacted like everywhere else. Our hospitality business is shut down. I take a look at something like the West Mountain Inn, who they depend on weddings starting in another week right through the fall, and all that's on hold. The residual impact of that, I think, is going to be felt in the town, to include are people going to be able to pay property taxes when property bills come up in November. And you know, we went in Vermont from, I don't know, less than 3% unemployment rate to, you know, I've heard figures as high as 30-40%. That is impactful. And so we are starting a conversation through the renewal project about, you know, how can we assist and have conversation about good planning and making sure that our small businesses are getting access to the financial monies that are flowing out of DC. We are very, you know, we've all heard the horror stories about where some of that money's gone, but you have to really question if they should have access to that versus somebody that's running a mom and pop country store.
Yeah. Well, Colonel Baker, thank you. I know you've got another phone call to get to, so I don't want to hold you up, but
Yeah,
thank you
thanks.
for your time. And,
Yeah, thank you.
And
We
we'll be in touch.
always appreciate your interest, Andrew. Take care.
All right. Have a
Bye
good
now.
day.
Bye now.